with women in marriage and families is actually quite a lot more advanced than the ways in which they are interpreted now. And I think that's also quite a productive and interesting place. We might see some shifts. So, you know, they're actually doing scholarly work to draw on Islamic jurisprudence and to get the marriage contract, for example, changed. Interesting way of thinking about it. And then, sorry, the last question was about the state, right? And about, I think I've forgotten it. I wrote here. Developmental state. The idea of the developmental state. You know, that model just doesn't work for me. I think we have very confusing conversations about developmental states in South Africa. I think there's a kind of rigorous scholarship of developmental state that has to do with the ways in which we might have a planning commission that actually directs investments and uses kind of tax breaks in ways that productively stimulate sectors of the economy to create greater inclusion and so on. That's one type of conversation. But the loose form of conversation about the developmental state appears to be simply the investment in the social sector and the grants, right? And that seemed to be the developmental state model, right? That we have a redistributive element through the grants. But in fact, the grants, and I'm a great supporter of the social grants, and I would never argue for them to be reduced, but they can't be the way in which we envisage moving forward. Right? The grants themselves are no substitute for decent jobs. That's what we have to do, is we have to begin to create an economy in which we have more and decent jobs. I don't see the current developmental state debates taking us in that direction, particularly. I also don't see, to my great disappointment, Carl, the National Planning Commission was very careless in its use of gender. It kind of started out with this lovely story of the women. You know, it was the embodiment of the virtuous subject of the National Planning Commission, and our future was embodied in the figure of a woman and her life, and everything else that followed, and particularly in its economic policies, did not address the sectors of the economy in which women predominate, which are the worst off sectors of the economy. Just fell right out of the conversation. So, you know, gender, this thin appropriation of gender equality, it all sounds very nice. We have this, I even used to talk about how the South African state was constructed as a women-friendly state, but in fact, it's not really. It's an alibi. It's an alibi to do nothing, to invoke that story in the opening pages of the National Planning Commission was actually to put women in her place as the kind of symbolic victim and or a symbolic agent, right? But actually with none of the serious work done in the Planning Commission about what it might mean to address women's unequal inclusion in the economy.
Right. David, the comrade over there, I'll take all four of you, and I feel I should give Carl a chance to reply to these.
Shame, no, don't.
No, he put his hand up, so we'll make him number 5, and that will be it. David, you first.
Yeah, my questions are, firstly, do we need a new manifesto? And secondly, how much weight would you put on the demand for socialized child and elderly care as a transformative measure in terms of demands for reducing inequality?
Thanks, David. In the red t-shirt, comrade.
Thanks, Rob. Professor, thanks a lot for your presentation. And as a government representative, one gets worried to get these kinds of remarks. But my duty is not to defend government too much, but to come up with suggestions at some stage what could be done. I think there are various structures that are in place. The Progressive Women of South Africa, the Gender Commission, the Human Rights Commission, and I think lastly, there is nothing that stops people from joining the ANC Women's League in particular. One begins to question at the very same time, because you can't influence anything if you are outside. That's our experience. I wonder how many people or how many women in this room do belong to the ANC Women's League. But anyway, our suggestion would be that we need to get deeper into issues. And when you were about to finish your presentation, I thought that tomorrow it was going to be a judgment day. And that is the finished story about women in terms of going ahead with their struggle and make sure that they are adequately represented. That's the only comment that I needed to make.
Thanks, Conrad. There were hands over here. Yes.
My question would be.
Put the mic on.
Sorry. Yeah, my question would be, what is gender, and can we imagine gender outside of a capitalist, I could say, organized system? Because now I feel that, of course, as a black man, I go as a young, I don't have means to be patriarchal. I don't know. I don't have much. I mean, I can't abuse. Maybe, in fact, if anything, I just see a fellow lady here as my equal. And I think maybe because now I've been conditioned, my idea of masculinity in this instance is that of a white man who has material and everything. And because now he has oppressed my father and my grandfather so much, then I've been conditioned to espouse to that. So, I don't know, do we have alternatively, outside of a capitalist, maybe a phrase for gender or things?
Thanks, Conrad. You and then Carl, that's it. Yeah.
My name is Brian Masimovo. I'm a religious leader. I think from listening from you from there, I think we need to understand the context of the church. I'm not starting a debate. Positions are given on the basis of spiritual work. And also our women, because I think maybe I misunderstood you. They play a role because there's no one who's oppressing them. They do it because of love. And also, when it comes on issues, when there is a violence in a relationship, what we do as a pastor, I want to clarify our role. We bring the two parties together. We try to listen. When we realize the issue, we don't take sides. We give good options, because that's not our role. So that is the issue I just wanted to clarify. Thank you.
I share your disappointment in this development, and I'm not going to defend it. I want to ask a different question.
Can Carl speak on the mic as well?
Don't have a mic here.
Okay, I can just maybe turn around this one.
I share Shireen's disappointment in the National Development Plan. I'm not going to really try and defend that. My question really to Shireen is, how do we understand this failure to implement any of the kind of progressive demands that are in the charters that she describes? And why I'm asking that is because it's almost a question around what is it that we are confronting? What is the nature of this beast that we call patriarchy? Where is it? Where do we flush it out? How do we tackle this thing? I mean, Shireen, you mentioned, you know, attitudes in societies, many places, many spaces in which women are disempowered and dominated. But the state is still important for all the kind of reasons of the policies that you're pointing to. How does one get you know, what is one's fighting against in relation to trying to shift the way the state is in relation to gender? Thanks.
Okay, so I'm going to try and answer very quickly because Jackie says we have no time.
Sorry, there's an anxious lady over here.
Hello. My question is, under the framework of feminism, is it wise to say that, is it inclusive to all types of women? Because, I mean, the struggle of let's just say, a domestic worker and interim madam are two different struggles. So is it wise to say that it's inclusive for everyone? Or could we say that, is it even possible for these two women to come together in such a way that they fight for one thing, of which is something I really don't understand, and I don't think it could get to that point. So I would understand if there actually is there a division under the framework of feminism, in maybe black radical feminism and feminism in itself. So yeah, that's what I want to understand.
Okay. So I'll even start there because actually that's a really core question, and I think, you know, it's important to know there isn't just one type of feminism, right? So there are many versions of feminism that relate to the kinds of difference that Asanda put her finger on earlier. And so I don't think what we want to do is aim at one single overarching master narrative of feminism. And I certainly don't think all women have the same interests. And I don't think that gender can be disentangled from race and class at all. In fact, you know, far from it. But that doesn't mean that there aren't many moments in which we can work together. And in fact, one of them relates to David's question about socialized care. In both these charters, there's a very strong emphasis on the provision that, you know, the understanding was not, was only partly that you would reshape responsibilities for care within families and households. It was also recognized that the state had to come in with particularly providing certain kinds of care. For example, the 54 Charter talks about the formation of creches, and particularly childcare centres based in factories and workplaces, so that working women would have that kind of support, right? So yes, we do. For me, socialised childcare is part of the argument I would make for defamiliarisation. It has to happen. There has to be a way of building up through the resources of the state a set of good, well-financed, high-quality care institutions. It relates to the question of alliances, because I think this is where we see the falling down of a potential alliance between middle-class women and poor women. So there's very little support among elite women for socialized care, and it's because they can outsource it, they can buy it. Labor is too cheap in South Africa. So if you think about other parts of the world where care was dealt with in collectivized ways, one of the reasons for that was that middle-class women who were in the workforce, unlike working-class women, had voice and agency to make demands on governments to provide these kinds of resources. And those middle-class women, because they had a certain degree of leverage in relation to political parties, were able to create the basic institutions of care with some degree of quality that were good enough, right? And so working class women benefited from that. That's one example of a potential cross-class alliance. Doesn't mean that their interests are necessarily the same. Potential alliance, but in South Africa we have not had that alliance because middle class women, I'm afraid, are all too easily able to exploit the paid domestic labor at exploitative rates, right? So that's one area in which we have to begin to have that conversation. And that's why I think in Parliament, women MPs have not taken up this issue, even though it's been brought to them over the course of the 20 years. They have not taken up the issue of socialized care. But socialized care also relates to the quality of hospitals, the quality of clinics, all of those. It's not just creches, right? And in all of those aspects, what we are up against, Carl, is a failing state. It's a state that is not doing the core work that a state ought to do in terms of providing. And I'm sorry to the comrade from government to sound so negative, but there are certain areas in which the poor service delivery has very direct impacts on these questions. So that's one of the things we are up against. If we could get right the basics, and I think in that respect there are aspects in the NDP that are hopeful. I mean, they put their finger on it, right? Let's get the basics right. Let's do things properly instead of so that's one of the things we're up against. State is important, but it has to be a capable state, and we haven't yet done enough to build a capable state. I agree that, of course, we shouldn't criticize purely from the ivory tower of academia. I'm actually quite a joiner, comrade. I tried working with the Commission on Gender Equality. I'm on the Section 6 committee of the Commission on Gender Equality, and I can tell you that the amount of work it took to persuade the Commission that substantive equality meant addressing the structural inequalities in our economy it took a whole year, and that all we did was to debate. There's no plan for dealing with that. That is the problem. There's no plan for dealing with it. These institutions have become spaces that are a facade of participation. They don't really do anything. I wish I didn't have to say that, because I come from the generation that fought for things like the CGE and the Human Rights Commission. You're right. Of course, we can't only influence from the outside, but sometimes you strategically have to step outside in order. You have to step outside of organizations, and you have to step outside of models, the current models, to think of a new way of moving forward. We do need a new paradigm. We really do, and we need a new paradigm that involves a vast range of people, that is not based just on the binary notion of women and men, that includes a much more progressive understanding of sexuality, that breaks down this relationship that we inherited actually from feminism, that sex is something that is biologically fixed in some way. All of those we need to address. I would like to see what can be done. I'd like to see a model of thinking about gender that includes masculinity, and I think that the men's movement has a role to play in addressing models of masculinity that are not rooted in the capitalist notion of men as breadwinners, right? And as you say, that is a model that has